A thin strip of paper curls out of a teletype machine and lands on the desk like a dropped ribbon. Black letters. No poetry. No room for debate. It is the kind of message that does not shout. It does not need to. A clerk smooths it flat. A stamp hits the corner. Another hand carries it down a hall, past maps, past officers with tired eyes, past a table where the front line is drawn in grease pencil. The paper reaches Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander. He reads it once. Then he reaches for his pencil. Because in this war, a pencil mark can move more power than a tank. A pencil mark can move fuel. It can move ammo. It can move bread and bandages. And it can make one army surge forward while another one slows down, almost overnight. So here is the puzzle. The Allies are winning. They have broken out of Normandy. They have chased the Germans across France. They have taken Paris. They have taken Brussels. They have even taken the great port of Antwerp. The road to Germany looks open. So why, in the fall of 1944, do the Allied armies begin to stall like cars with empty gas tanks? Why does one British commander keep pushing in one direction, while Eisenhower keeps pointing to another? And what is the one memo that finally makes Eisenhower stop asking politely? Stay with the paper, stay with the pencil, because the answer is not just about battle plans. It is about how a modern army eats, how it drinks, how it moves, and how one quiet decision at the top can cut a supply line without firing a shot. Now, let's rewind. Picture the map of Western Europe in late summer 1944. The Allied front is no longer a tight beachhead. It is a long, stretched line running from the North Sea down toward Switzerland. That sounds strong. It sounds like control. But long lines have long problems. Every mile forward is another mile the trucks must drive. Another mile of fuel burned just to carry fuel. Another mile of tires worn down. Another bridge that can break. Another traffic jam that can turn a fast army into a waiting army. Victory is moving faster than the supply system can follow. And that is where the real war begins. Not the war of bullets. The war of boxes, crates of shells, barrels of gasoline, rolls of wire, spare parts, medical kits, food, winter coats that are still back at the docks. In this kind of war, you do not just need brave soldiers. You need a river of stuff, and rivers need ports. In Normandy, the Allies land on beaches and build temporary ports. They capture Cherbourg. They start unloading ships. But as the armies race east, Normandy is suddenly far behind. The supply road from the coast to the front grows into a monster. A few hundred miles of hard driving, day after day, in convoys that never seem to end. This is when Eisenhower's world turns into a math problem, not a simple one, a cruel one. He has more armies than he can fully feed, so he must choose, and every choice creates a loser. On one side is the American push, led by Omar Bradley, the calm American Army Group commander. Under him is George Patton, the fast, hungry tank general, always asking for more fuel. On the other side is Bernard Montgomery, the British commander in the north. Montgomery is careful. He likes set battles, he likes full preparation, he likes overwhelming force, and he has a big idea. He wants the Allies to stop spreading out. He wants one main punch, one hard thrust, aimed at the heart of Germany. He wants it in the north. He wants it under his control. This is where Allied unity starts to crack quietly. In public, everyone smiles. Everyone talks about teamwork. In private, the argument is sharp, because behind every plan is a question nobody wants to say out loud. Whose flag gets to lead the final march into Germany? Whose army gets the glory? And who gets the supplies? Eisenhower is a coalition commander. That means he is not just fighting Germany. He is also holding two great allies together. He cannot command Britain the way he commands an American unit. He must persuade. He must balance pride. He must keep egos from turning into open revolt. And he knows something else. If he is seen as giving too much to the British commander, American generals will explode. American politics will explode. The feeling back home will sour. So Eisenhower tries to steer a middle path. He favors a broad advance, pushing on multiple fronts, keeping pressure everywhere. Montgomery argues for a narrow advance, a single spear. And then the supply crisis makes the argument real, because the math says this. You can have a broad front on the map, but you cannot have a broad front in the fuel tanks, not yet. So Eisenhower starts doing something that will define the next months. He starts using supplies as a steering wheel. He cannot always tell a commander, stop, but he can tell the trucks where to go. He can tell the depots what to load. He can tell the rail lines which army gets the next trains. He can change the war without changing a single order on paper, at least not one the public will notice. And this is where the story turns. In late August, Eisenhower makes a choice. He shifts support to the north to help the British commander race toward key objectives, including Antwerp. To do that, he pushes American fuel toward the part of the front supporting the British advance. That means Patton's fuel dries up, Patton's tanks slow, his letters get hotter, his mood gets darker. But Eisenhower tells himself it is temporary. He thinks the port of Antwerp will soon solve everything. Antwerp is not just a city, it is a giant door to the sea. A deep-water port that can swallow ships full of supplies and spit out cargo close to the front. And compared to Normandy, Antwerp is much closer to the depots the Allies are building in Belgium. If Antwerp opens, the whole supply problem changes. If it stays closed, the whole war slows down. Now here is the twist. The Allies take Antwerp quickly. But they do not control the waterway that leads to it. The Scheldt estuary is still in German hands. Coastal guns, mines, strong positions. The docks are there ready, but ships cannot safely sail in. So Antwerp becomes a locked pantry, full of shelves but no food inside, and the armies keep eating through what they have. This is where the argument about strategy turns into an argument about priorities. Montgomery wants to use the supplies he has to reach the Rhine and smash into Germany. He supports a bold plan in September that becomes famous. Operation Market Garden, a leap of airborne troops, a long road push, a chain of bridges. A gamble to cross rivers fast and get a foothold beyond them. Eisenhower approves it, hoping it will speed the end and also help the North later. But there is a condition, at least from Eisenhower's point of view. After the gamble, the North must turn and open Antwerp, because without Antwerp, no deep push can be fed for long. The operation begins. For days, the world watches the gamble unfold. At first, it looks like a breakthrough. Then the weather, the resistance, and the distance bite back. The far bridge does not hold. The corridor becomes a thin lifeline, a road that must be defended like a glass tube. And when the operation ends, the Allies have gained ground, but they have not gained the big prize. Worse, the front is now in an awkward shape, a long, narrow corridor that needs troops to guard it, and those troops must be fed. The same trucks that could have hauled shells west to clear the Scheldt are now hauling fuel and food to hold the corridor. So the supply crisis tightens again. And now the German side gets a gift. Time to regroup, time to move units, time to dig in, time to turn the Western Wall into a real barrier again. Now back to the Allied side. Eisenhower's job is getting harder by the day. He is watching the whole front slow. In the south, Patton is banging at German defenses near Metz and the Saar, and he keeps asking for more fuel and ammo. In the center, the American First Army is grinding against tough ground, short on supplies. In the north, the British commander is still thinking about the next punch toward the Ruhr. And the one thing Eisenhower needs is still blocked: Antwerp. This is where you must understand how supply decisions really get made. It is not just a general shouting into a radio. It is a chain. First, the Supreme Commander sets the big priorities. Then staff officers turn those priorities into numbers. They talk in tons per day. They talk in truck companies. They talk in rail cars. They decide which army gets the next batch of gasoline, often called POL, meaning petroleum, oil, and lubricants. They decide how much artillery ammo can be spent without the stockpiles collapsing. They decide which repair parts go first. And they do this while the front is moving, while roads are jammed, while bridges are down, while the weather shifts. One of the biggest tools is the convoy system. The Americans create famous truck routes, including one called the Red Ball Express, a non-stop flow of trucks that at its peak hauls huge amounts of supplies forward each day. But even that has limits. Trucks break, drivers collapse from lack of sleep, roads clog with mud, fuel gets burned just moving the fuel. To support the Northern Gamble in September, another special route is set up for the British push, a dedicated supply haul meant to keep that operation alive. That is what this looks like in real life. Thousands of vehicles, bumper to bumper, pushing cargo across long distances, night after night. And every extra mile of hauling is a mile not hauling something else. So when Montgomery pushes for a big northern thrust, he is not only asking for permission, he is asking for the whole pipeline. He is asking Eisenhower to tilt the entire supply system toward him. And Eisenhower has to decide how long he can do that before the rest of the front starves. This is the private war inside the public war. Now, a comfort recap. The Allies are winning, but they are stretched. Antwerp is captured, but the sea door is locked. Supplies are not enough for everyone, so Eisenhower must choose who gets fed, and every choice creates bitterness. Now watch the pressure build. At the end of September, there is a high-level conference at Versailles. Eisenhower and his top commanders talk about what comes next. The key point is simple. A deep push into Germany needs Antwerp. Eisenhower calls the port a prerequisite, an essential step. He also gives the Northern Army Group an important role in the next phase. The plan in that moment points north, toward the Ruhr. But the plan also demands that the approaches to Antwerp be cleared, because the Ruhr is not just a place on a map. It is a hungry machine. If the Allies want to fight there, they must feed the fight. And the only way to feed it is with a short, strong supply line. That means ports. That means Antwerp. Now, here comes the part most people miss. Clearing Antwerp is not one job. It is many jobs at once. To clear the waterway, you must clear both shores. You must fight through lowland, water barriers, and strong points. You must deal with islands and peninsulas. You must clear mines. You must silence guns. And while you are doing that, the German forces in the area are not politely waiting. They are moving. In early September, many German troops managed to pull back from the coastal region and get across the water into positions that defend the estuary. Large numbers escape with their guns. That means the locked door gets extra locks, so the clearing fight becomes harder, and it will take time and ammo and careful planning. That is exactly what the Canadian First Army is trying to do in early October. The Canadians are tough, experienced, and determined, but they need support. They need ammo stocks. And they need the Northern commander to put real weight behind the job, not just words. Here is where the story tightens into a single hallway again. At Eisenhower's headquarters, the mood shifts. Because reports come in that the entire front is slowing, not just a little, a lot. The autumn rains are coming, the trucks are strained. Some units are stuck holding positions because they cannot get the supplies to attack. Eisenhower can feel the danger. If the Allies stall too long, the Germans can build a stronger line. If the Germans get time, the price of the next advance will rise. And Eisenhower has seen what happens when a force is stretched too thin. He remembers North Africa. He remembers how a surprise attack can cut into a long line and create panic. He does not want another shock like that. So he begins to tighten his grip, not with public speeches, with private messages, with quiet pressure. This is where the open loops begin to form. What was the trigger memo that made Eisenhower stop talking in gentle words? And what did he threaten to take upward, toward the highest level, if the British commander did not shift his priorities? Now, let's zoom out for one more important piece. In a coalition war, supply is not only math, it is also nationalism. Eisenhower has to think about two armies that are allies but not the same. They use different equipment, different spare parts, different ways of organizing transport. They also have different political masters. So the Supreme Commander often tries to keep their supply lines as separate as possible. Not because he wants distance, because he wants less friction, less fighting over the same crate, less blaming. But the front is so stretched that separation becomes hard. At times, American supply services are still helping support British needs. At times, American units fight under British direction. At times, the whole system overlaps, and overlap creates arguments. Who took what? Who delayed whom? Who is responsible when a Canadian unit rations shells? This is where the paper on the desk becomes so dangerous, because paper creates records. And records create accountability. Now picture Eisenhower's headquarters in early October. Maps cover the walls. Phones ring. Officers walk fast but try not to look rushed. Everyone knows the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. The war has outrun the supply chain. So the big question is no longer, where do we want to go? The big question is, where can we afford to go? And then the proof arrives, not a rumor, not a complaint from a rival general, a report. It comes from the naval side, from the people who think in harbors and channels and ships. The naval commander is Admiral Bertram Ramsay, the British sea commander who helped plan the landings. He is not a man who enjoys land politics. He cares about one thing: ports that work, ships that unload, a pipeline that can flow. And Ramsay has heard something alarming about the fight to open Antwerp. He has been told that the Canadians cannot keep attacking the way they need to, not because they lack courage, because they lack ammunition stocks. He is told that if the stocks are not built up, the Canadian push could be delayed far longer than anyone wants. Now, in war, numbers can be argued. One staff says we have enough. Another staff says we do not. One commander says the Navy is exaggerating. Another says the Army is drifting. But this is why Ramsay's report matters. It changes the tone, because it is not coming from the usual shouting match between land generals. It is coming from a different corner of the machine, and it points at a single, ugly possibility. That the Allies have the port, they have the docks, but they are failing to open the door. So here's the problem, stated simply. Every day Antwerp stays closed, the Allied supply line stays long. Every day the supply line stays long, the armies burn fuel just to fetch fuel. Every day fuel is wasted on the road, fewer attacks are possible at the front. And every day the front stalls, the Germans get stronger. So for Eisenhower, Antwerp is not a side mission. It is the mission that makes all other missions possible. And if the British commander keeps looking east while Antwerp stays locked, Eisenhower sees a disaster forming. Not a dramatic explosion, a slow choke. A war that drags into winter, not because of German genius but because of Allied logistics. Now, Eisenhower has tried polite messages. He has tried conferences. He has tried assigning missions and trusting commanders to follow through, but the reports tell him it is not happening fast enough. So he starts to consider the one lever he always has: support. Because a commander cannot attack without fuel. A commander cannot keep pushing without ammunition. A commander cannot chase an enemy without trucks that keep arriving. And all of that flows through the Supreme Commander's priority system. This is the quiet power of the job. Eisenhower does not need to publicly humiliate a British ally. He can simply shift the emphasis. He can put weight behind a different task. He can make sure the next wave of ammunition goes to the Canadians clearing the estuary. He can slow the flow to any push that does not match the main need. And if someone complains, he can point to the map and say, "We need Antwerp." Now you might ask, why not just issue a blunt, formal order? In this alliance, that is not easy. A formal order from the top to a major Allied commander is a big step. It is rare. It is risky. It can turn a military dispute into a political crisis. So Eisenhower tries to avoid that. He prefers a private line, a message meant for one pair of eyes. A message that cannot be spun for newspapers. A message that says in plain terms, do this. And if you do not, I will take this higher. That last part is the threat, not a threat of punishment. A threat of escalation. Because higher authorities mean Washington and London. It means chiefs of staff. It means people who will not care about a commander's pride. They will care about results. And higher authorities also mean scrutiny, records pulled, decisions reviewed, priorities questioned. In other words, an investigation into how the alliance is using its strength. Now let's set the room. It is early October. The northern corridor from the September gamble still demands attention. The Canadian fight near the estuary is hard. The American armies are short of supplies too. The entire front feels like it is holding its breath. And Eisenhower is about to sit across from the British commander, the Field Marshal. The Field Marshal is not an easy man to confront. He is sharp. He is confident. He believes deeply in his own plan. He also believes the North should lead the final blow. And he does not like being told how to run his fight. The naval commander, Ramsay, is also in the picture now, armed with his report. And Eisenhower's staff, the people who watch the numbers, are watching Eisenhower. Because what happens next will decide what the trucks do tomorrow. Now, one last recap before the door opens. The Allies have a locked port that could save the entire campaign. The Supreme Commander believes it must be opened fast. The British commander is still pulled toward a push into Germany. A naval report claims the Canadians may be delayed unless ammunition is supplied at once. Eisenhower does not want a public fight, but he cannot let the campaign freeze. So he is about to use the quiet weapon of war, the supply line. And now we return to the object from the start, a piece of paper, the trigger memo. It lies in a folder carried by an aide down the hall toward a conference room. Inside the room, maps cover the table. Coffee sits untouched. Cigarette smoke hangs in the air. A chair scrapes back. Eisenhower steps in. The aide sets the folder down in front of him. Across the table, the British Field Marshal is arriving, face set, ready to argue. The naval commander follows, holding his ground. Eisenhower opens the folder, looks at the top page, and slowly turns it so the Field Marshal can see it. In the corner, stamped in ink, are the words that tell you this is no longer a polite suggestion. Eisenhower slides the memo forward, and the room goes quiet right as the Field Marshal reaches for it. His fingers hover over the page, and for a moment he does not pick it up. He reads the header first, then the short lines underneath, like a man tasting something bitter to be sure it is real. Across from him, Eisenhower stays still. No tapping pencil, no soft jokes, just the calm face of a commander who has stopped bargaining. The naval commander stands off to the side, hands clasped behind his back, watching the Field Marshal's eyes move line by line. The Field Marshal looks up, not angry yet. More like surprised that the paper exists at all. Because in a room full of maps and strong opinions, a paper like this is different. A paper like this is evidence. It is not a plan for someday. It is a report from today. And the report says, in plain words, that the Canadians at the mouth of the river are being forced to slow down, not because they do not want to fight, because they do not have enough ammunition stocks to keep attacking at the pace the mission demands. The field marshal sets the paper down carefully, as if the desk might crack. He turns his head toward the naval commander. The naval commander does not blink. He is not here to win an argument. He is here because ships cannot sail on pride. A port cannot open on speeches. The field marshal's voice tightens. He challenges the report. He calls the idea of a stoppage exaggerated, even reckless. He insists the fight is already underway. He says the operation is going well. He wants Eisenhower to understand that his army group is handling its responsibilities. Eisenhower lets him speak. Then Eisenhower leans forward, not much. Just enough to make the table feel smaller, and when he talks, the room changes. He does not argue about style, he argues about math. He says Antwerp is the key, not as a slogan, as a hard limit. He says that if Antwerp is not opened soon, the entire Allied front will slow to a crawl. Not just the British front, all of it, from the Channel to Switzerland. He makes it simple. If the ships cannot come in, the supplies cannot come forward. If the supplies cannot come forward, the attacks cannot continue. And if the attacks cannot continue, the enemy gets the winter. Now watch what happens. The field marshal tries a different angle. He points back to the last conference, the last set of agreed priorities. He reminds Eisenhower that the push toward the Ruhr and the Rhine has been treated as the main effort. He suggests that the North must keep its pressure eastward. He implies that to slow the eastward push is to throw away a rare chance. It is a familiar argument. A narrow door is open. Run through it before it closes. Eisenhower does not deny the door. He denies the idea that the door can be walked through on empty stomachs. He tells the field marshal, in effect, you can talk all day about where you want to go. But we are talking about what we can feed. Then Eisenhower points to the paper again. The trigger memo, not because it is dramatic, because it is specific. It gives a date. It gives a warning. If ammunition stocks do not rise quickly, the Canadian attack pace collapses. That means Antwerp stays locked. Eisenhower looks at the field marshal as if to say, this is not a theory. This is what my Navy is reporting to me. The field marshal stiffens. He does not like being questioned by a sailor. He does not like hearing that someone outside his command is telling Eisenhower what is happening inside his battle area. And he says so. He questions how the Navy can speak with authority about land operations. He implies the Navy is making wild statements about things it cannot truly know. The naval commander's jaw tightens, but he stays silent. Eisenhower, again, stays calm, and then he does something that is easy to miss. He shifts the subject away from who is offended and back to what will be done. He tells the field marshal that he expects Antwerp to be treated as the first priority, not one priority among many. The first. He says the operations designed to clear the entrance require the field marshal's personal attention. That line lands hard because it carries an unspoken accusation. If it requires your personal attention, then maybe you have not been giving it. The field marshal hears it that way. He bristles. He insists he has been doing what he can. He points to other pressures. He points to lines that must be held. He points to battles that cannot simply be paused. And then, for a moment, the room fills with the real truth of coalition war. This is not just one commander giving one order to one subordinate. This is two nations, each with pride, each with their own leaders back home, each with their own story they want to tell at the end. And those stories are pressing down on this table like a weight. Now Eisenhower draws the line. He says that if there is still doubt about priorities, he will remove the doubt. He will send messages that spell it out. He will direct the flow of supplies to match the mission. And then he says the sentence that changes the temperature. He says, in effect, that if the field marshal believes Eisenhower's directives endanger success, then the matter cannot stay in this room. It must go higher, to higher authority, to the people in Washington and London who can settle it, however drastic the decision may be. That is the threat, not a shouting threat, a procedural threat. The kind that scares powerful men because it creates a record. A record invites questions. Questions invite reviews. Reviews invite consequences. So the real question is this. What exactly was Eisenhower willing to have higher authority look at? Not a single battle, not a single road. He was willing to have them look at whether the senior British commander was obeying orders, and whether the command arrangement itself should change. In other words, Eisenhower was willing to let the alliance examine the field marshal's conduct in the open and decide what to do about it. It is hard to keep fighting with a smile when that is on the table. The field marshal does not answer right away. He looks down again at the memo. He looks at the map. He looks at Eisenhower. And then he does something that tells you he understands the danger. He backs away from the fight over command, not because he suddenly agrees with everything, but because he realizes the cost of continuing this argument. If the dispute goes higher, he might win a point, but the alliance might lose time. And time is the one thing the Germans still have. So he gives Eisenhower what Eisenhower needs most in that moment: compliance, not in a public speech, in a private assurance. He accepts that Antwerp must come first. He commits to giving the opening of the port top priority, and he signals that, on the question of command, Eisenhower will hear no more. Only then does Eisenhower lean back. Only then does the naval commander relax his shoulders slightly. Only then does the paper stop being a weapon and become a tool, because now it can do what paper does best in war. It can send the same message down 100 chains of command at once. Now, a short comfort recap. Antwerp is captured, but the sea door is still locked. Eisenhower uses a Navy report about Canadian ammunition limits to force a decision. The field marshal agrees, and the alliance shifts its weight toward opening the port. Now back to the machine. Because words in a conference room are only the beginning. The real change happens when the supply clerks get new instructions, when the rail planners change schedules, when truck companies are reassigned, when ammunition dumps are filled with one purpose in mind. This is the moment Eisenhower quietly cuts off one supply line to feed another. Not by starving anyone on purpose, by refusing to keep feeding plans that cannot be sustained. Think of the Allied supply system like a long hose. In the summer, Eisenhower used that hose to water the whole garden, broad and wide. In the fall, the pressure drops. He cannot water everything. So he pinches the hose in certain places to raise the flow in one direction. That is what happens after this meeting. The field marshal's Eastern ambitions do not vanish, but they no longer get first claim on the pipeline. The Canadian Army, fighting in ugly ground near the river mouth, becomes the center of gravity. And to make that real, the field marshal begins shifting British units to help. This is important because it shows that Eisenhower's line was not just a scolding, it was a reordering of effort. The British Second Army, which would rather face east, now must also face west, clearing areas and securing ground to protect the Canadian operation. More support is pushed toward the fight around the Scheldt. More attention is pushed toward the port. And just as important, other big dreams are pushed back. There is no grand leap to Berlin in October. There is no quick slam into the Ruhr on a narrow front. There is a slower, dirtier reality. Open the door first. Now watch the consequences on the ground. The Germans understand Antwerp too. They know what it means. So they do not defend the entrance with a thin screen. They defend it like a lock on a vault. The mouth of the river is guarded by fortifications, coastal guns, and strong positions on islands and narrow land strips. The terrain is low and wet. Movement is hard. Every attack line becomes a funnel. Some historians argue that if the Allies had turned immediately in early September and cleared the river approaches before other gambles, it might have been easier. But by October, the enemy has dug in. Time has thickened the defenses. This is one of the cruel rules of war. A delay does not just delay the goal, it changes the price. The Canadian force begins its push in early October. The fighting is not a straight run. It is a series of hard bites, a canal line here, a narrow causeway there. A town that looks small on a map but is strong in reality. A stretch of ground where every yard has to be earned. Progress comes, but it comes with strain. And Eisenhower's staff keeps watching one number over and over. How soon can ships reach Antwerp? Because until ships can reach Antwerp, every other battle is borrowing against the future. Now the field marshal faces his own problem. He has promised priority to Antwerp, but he is also still responsible for holding and managing the broad northern front. He must protect the Dutch corridor from the earlier gamble. He must hold positions along rivers and canals. He must cover the flank of the Allied line. He cannot simply abandon everything else. So even after the meeting, friction remains. Not the friction of open rebellion, the friction of scarce resources and too many tasks. This is why Eisenhower's pressure does not stop after one conversation. He continues sending messages that underline the same point. Antwerp is vital. The need grows more urgent as bad weather approaches. There is no misunderstanding allowed, and he makes another point that cuts deep. He tells the field marshal that, compared to American units far to the south and east, the British side is relatively rich in supplies. That is not an insult. It is a fact meant to justify a demand. If you have more, you can do more. If you can do more, then do it where it matters most. Now, notice what Eisenhower is doing. He is framing Antwerp as a shared requirement, not a British favor to the Americans. He says the British leadership agrees. He says the top American leadership agrees. He turns it into an alliance-wide necessity. That matters because it reduces the field marshal's ability to treat it as a personal argument. It becomes policy. And policy is harder to fight without looking selfish. The field marshal, for his part, also makes his move. He issues his own directive, telling his army group that Antwerp is now the top priority. That is how he saves face. He does not want it to look like Eisenhower dragged him. He wants it to look like he is choosing it. And in war, appearances are not decoration. Appearances affect morale. Appearances affect cooperation. Appearances affect politics. So the field marshal turns the order into his own push, and the supply system follows. Now, who benefited? First, the Canadian soldiers at the river mouth. They needed time, manpower, and ammunition support to keep pressing forward. They also needed the enemy's escape routes cut, so German forces could not simply slip away and thicken the next line. Second, the American armies. Even though the fight is happening in the far north, the payoff is for the entire front. Once Antwerp opens, the distance from ship to depot shrinks dramatically. Instead of hauling supplies hundreds of miles from Normandy or other distant ports, the Allies can bring cargo much closer to where it is needed. That changes the pace of war. It means fewer trucks breaking down just to carry fuel. It means more fuel reaching tanks. It means more shells reaching guns. It means simply more freedom to attack. Third, Eisenhower himself. Not as a man seeking credit, but as a commander trying to keep the coalition moving. By forcing clarity, he reduces the endless debate that drains time. He turns discussion into execution. Now who stalled? The field marshal's eastward push stalls, not because he lacks ambition, because the supply system can no longer indulge a big eastern thrust while the port remains locked. His forces have to spend energy on the west and the river approaches. The grand dream of a fast northern punch into Germany is postponed. Patton, too, is still constrained. The southern battles remain hard and costly. Supply shortages do not vanish overnight. Eisenhower has not solved the problem yet. He has only chosen the one solution that can solve it later. Open the port. Now here's the key. This is not only about one field marshal and one memo. This is about how power works in a modern war. In older wars, a king might punish a general with a court order or a public disgrace. In this war, a supreme commander can punish a plan by changing its fuel. He can reward a mission by feeding it. He can settle arguments without firing anyone just by shifting who gets the trucks and the rail cars. It is quiet. It is deadly effective. And it is also political because it avoids a public rupture. Eisenhower does not need to humiliate a British ally in front of cameras. He can get what he needs through the pipeline. Now let's close the first open loop. What was the trigger memo? It was the Navy report, delivered up the chain, warning that the Canadians could be forced to pause major attacks until early November unless ammunition stocks were built up promptly. That report gave Eisenhower something he could put on the table. It turned frustration into urgency. It turned a general feeling of delay into a specific alarm with a date attached. And it came from a source that cared about ports for a living. That is why it mattered. Now the second open loop. What did Eisenhower threaten to investigate? He did not threaten a dramatic courtroom scene. He threatened something more frightening to a senior commander. He threatened to refer the dispute to higher authority, meaning the top leadership in the alliance. If the field marshal continued to argue that Eisenhower's command directives were wrong or dangerous, Eisenhower was willing to have Washington and London review the whole issue and make whatever decision they thought necessary. That kind of review could have meant major changes, including changes in command roles. It also would have forced everyone to answer hard questions about priorities, obedience, and results. Eisenhower used that possibility as a lever, and it worked. Now, the rest of the story is the hard, patient grind that follows the paper. As October moves on, the fighting around the Scheldt becomes the slow opening of a lock, one click at a time. The Germans are pushed back from key positions. The approaches are fought over and cleared in stages. The battle is not glamorous. It does not have the clean shape of a famous airborne drop. It is the kind of fight where weather, water, and fortifications are enemies too. But it is the fight that makes the next months possible. By early November, minesweeping is underway and the final obstacles are removed. And late in November, the first ship finally reaches Antwerp. When that happens, the cold open from the beginning of this story becomes fully clear. That clipped order on paper did not win a battle by itself. It changed the flow. It changed what the front could do next. It told an entire system to stop chasing the horizon and start opening the door that would feed the chase. And it did it quietly, without a public showdown that might have damaged the alliance. Some historians argue that the delay in opening Antwerp helped set the stage for later troubles, because it slowed the Allied buildup and gave the enemy time to reorganize and plan. Others argue the Allies had many pressures at once, and no choice was simple in that moment. But on one point, serious histories tend to agree. Without Antwerp, the Allied advance into Germany could not be sustained at the scale needed. So that memo, and the line Eisenhower drew with it, mattered. It mattered to the Canadians fighting in the mud near the river mouth. It mattered to the Americans burning fuel on long roads in the south. It mattered to the British soldiers holding a stretched front in the north. And it mattered to Eisenhower, the coalition commander, because it proved something he had always known. In a modern war, leadership is not only giving brave speeches. It is feeding the right mission at the right time. It is knowing when unity needs gentle talk and when unity needs a hard line. Now we return to the desk again where we began, that thin strip of paper, the stamp, the quiet room, the moment a supply line changes direction. A front can look the same on a map for days, even weeks. But one order can change what the map will look like next month, because the trucks will go where the paper tells them. And the war will follow the trucks.